The ballroom smelled like old money and fresh spite. Nora had noticed that about these kinds of rooms, the way wealth had its own particular scent, something between cut flowers and carpet cleaner and the quiet, suffocating pressure of people who had never once worried about whether their card would go through at a grocery store. She stood near the east wall, beside a pillar wrapped in white ribbon, holding a glass of sparkling water she hadn't asked for and wasn't going to drink, watching her stepsister work the room like she'd been born inside it. Which, in every way that mattered, she had. "You're blocking the light," Simone said as she glided past, not stopping, not looking at her. Just a sentence dropped like a lit cigarette. "Move 2 steps left. You're ruining the aesthetic." Nora didn't move. She hadn't moved in 26 years when people told her to, and she wasn't going to start now, in a room full of strangers wearing more money on their wrists than she made in 4 months of contracts. She was here because her stepfather had asked her to be. That was the entirety of the reason. Gerald Ashby had looked at her over breakfast with those watery, apologetic eyes he always wore when he was about to ask her for something that wasn't fair, and he'd said, "Nora, sweetheart, it would mean a great deal to our family if you came tonight." He hadn't said which family. He hadn't needed to. It wasn't hers he was talking about. It was never hers. She shifted her weight to her other foot and looked at the ceiling. High arches, gilded molding, chandeliers the size of small cars. The Renwick Hotel had hosted presidents and foreign dignitaries, and apparently, tonight, a fundraising gala for the Ashby Group's charitable foundation, which was a real thing that did real work and also happened to generate an enormous amount of goodwill for Gerald's business relationships. Nora knew this because she had audited the foundation's books for 3 consecutive years as a favor, unpaid. She'd found 2 accounting errors the first year that would have triggered an IRS flag. She'd fixed them and sent Gerald a summary report and received a fruit basket. She was thinking about the fruit basket, specifically whether the pineapple had been fresh or canned, and what that said about how Gerald valued her time when the temperature in the room changed. It wasn't something she could name exactly. More like a frequency shift. The kind of thing you felt in your back teeth before you identified it in your brain. Conversations didn't stop, but they adjusted. Voices dropped half a register. Laughter became more careful. She watched it move through the crowd like a current, subtle and specific, and then she tracked it back to its source. He had come through the far entrance. He wasn't the tallest man in the room. He wasn't the loudest or the most decorated or the most aggressively handsome in the way that Simone's boyfriend and his friends were handsome. All gym and grooming and practiced confidence. This man was something else. Late 30s, maybe older, it was difficult to say. Dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone in a way that read less like casual and more like he genuinely did not care what anyone in this room thought of him. He moved with the kind of stillness that only very dangerous or very tired people carry, a stillness that wasn't peace, but calculation. His name floated to her from somewhere nearby. "Vane? Cassian Vane is here. Didn't think he'd come. After what happened with the Delacourt contract, she filed it away the way she filed everything. A name, a face, a room reacting. She looked back at her water glass. Simone had materialized at the center of the room again, which was her natural habitat, laughing at something a man in a burgundy jacket was saying, touching his arm lightly, performing delight with the precision of someone who had been practicing since childhood. She wore a dress that probably cost $3,000. It was white and perfect and exactly right for the room. Nora was wearing a navy blue dress she'd owned for 6 years, hemmed twice. With a small repair at the left shoulder seam, she'd done herself with thread that was almost but not quite the right shade. She'd told herself it wasn't noticeable in dim lighting. It was probably noticeable. She was calculating whether she could make it to the east exit before Gerald's assistant spotted her and reported back, when Simone laughed. Not the room laugh, the other one. Nora knew the difference. She'd grown up learning the difference. Simone turned, very deliberately, and looked at her from across the room. Then she said something to the woman beside her, a woman Nora didn't know, someone sharp-faced and jewelry-heavy. And the woman glanced over, and then both of them laughed, and Simone lifted one elegant hand and made a gesture. Small, dismissive, the kind of gesture that said, "That? Right there, that's what I'm talking about." The woman nodded, and kept nodding with the enthusiasm of someone who had immediately understood the joke. The joke being Nora, the dress. The shoes she'd polished this morning in the bathroom of her apartment over the sound of her upstairs neighbor doing something rhythmic and unknowable with what sounded like a wrench. The way she was standing, too straight, too still, too obviously not belonging, like a nail that forgot it was supposed to be a screw. Nora set her water glass down on the tray of a passing server. She breathed in through her wisps, out through her mouth. She had survived worse. She had survived her mother's funeral with Simone crying louder than anyone else in the room, louder than Nora, making sure of it. She had survived being removed from the will on a technicality that Gerald's lawyer had drafted 17 days after the wedding. She had survived 3 years of being the person who fixed the foundation's books and received fruit. She could survive a laugh. She turned toward the wall, intending to spend the next 45 minutes examining if socially acceptable to leave until it was socially acceptable to leave, when someone stopped beside her. Not a passing someone, a stopping someone. She turned her head. Cassian Vane was standing approximately 18 inches to her left, looking at the same painting. He had a glass of something amber and was not drinking it, the same way she had not been drinking her water, which felt like a strange and meaningless coincidence that she noted anyway, because she noted everything. He didn't look at her. He looked at the painting. "The rigging is wrong," he said. His voice was low, not the low of a man who'd practiced it in a mirror. Just low, like it lived there. Nora looked at the painting. It was a fairly standard seascape, a tall-masted ship on grey water, a grey sky, competent but not remarkable. She looked at the rigging. "The forestay," she said. "It's attached to the wrong point on the bowsprit." He glanced at her then, just briefly. Something moved across his face that she couldn't categorize. Not surprise, exactly, more like adjustment. The minor recalibration of an expectation. "You sail," he said. "No, I looked it up once for a client. Maritime insurance dispute. I needed to understand the terminology remembered. I remember most things I need to understand." He looked back at the painting. She looked back at the painting. The rigging was definitely wrong. After a moment, he said, "Vane." She said, "I know." Another small pause. She could hear Simone somewhere behind her cycling back into a brighter register of laughter ship. "Nora Ashby," she said, because it seemed like an exchange was expected. Ashby. He didn't look at her when he said it, but there was a quality to the repetition, recognition, or something adjacent to it. Gerald Ashby's daughter, stepdaughter. There's a distinction. Usually is. He lifted his glass, considered it, put it back down without drinking. "You've been standing by this wall for 40 minutes. You noticed. I notice people who don't move." She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. She had learned a long time ago that silence was not the same as weakness. Most people couldn't stand silence. Most people filled it with whatever was closest and least considered, and then you knew things about them that they hadn't meant to tell you. Cassian Vane did not fill the silence. He stood in it like he owned it. "The woman who laughed at you," he said, still not looking at her, his voice the same even, unhurried, carrying no particular weight. "That was deliberate. She does most things deliberately. Sister. Stepsister. He turned then, finally, and looked at her directly for the first time, and she made herself hold it because she was not the kind of person who looked away first. His eyes were dark, not kind, not unkind, assessing, the kind of look that counted things, catalogued them, put them in columns. She recognized the look because she had it too, in mirrors, in meetings, in moments when she needed to understand a situation before it understood her. "You fixed Gerald's books?" he said. She went very still. "Foundation audit," he said. 3 years running. You caught 2 errors in year 1 that would have been significant. How do you know that? It wasn't a question. She knew exactly how he knew that. She just wanted him to say it. "Because Gerald Ashby is 17 months behind on a payment to my organization," he said. and before I have a conversation with a man about money, I understand his money, which means I understand everyone his money touches. He looked back at the painting. You're very good at what you do, and you do it for free. I did it as a favor. A favor that's gone unrepaid for 3 years is not a favor. It's an arrangement where one party has forgotten the terms. The accuracy of that sat between them like something heavy. She didn't agree out loud. She didn't need to. Gerald is in trouble, she said. Not a question either. Gerald, Vane said, is in the kind of trouble that has a very specific solution, and that solution requires someone with your particular skill set. He paused. There's a leak in my organization. Funds are moving in patterns that don't match the surface records. I need someone who can see the discrepancy, not guess at it, not run software at it, but actually read the architecture of how money hides. He glanced at her. You can do that. Gerald's debt disappears if you do. She looked at him. He looked at the painting. The chandelier above them threw light that was designed to be flattering and managed to make everyone in the room look like they were standing inside a very expensive lie. And if I say no, she asked, then we have a different conversation with Gerald. Tonight. She understood what that meant. She understood it the way you understood certain things in your body before your brain confirmed them. The cold certainty of it, the weight. She thought about Gerald's watery eyes at the breakfast table. She thought about the fruit basket. She thought about Simone laughing across the room and the woman nodding along and 17 years of being the wrong daughter in the wrong dress, with the wrong last name and the right skill set that everyone used and no one acknowledged. I want it in writing, she said. Something almost imperceptible moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one, or the memory. You'll have a contract by morning, he said. She nodded once the way she nodded at clients when terms were agreed upon. Businesslike. Clean. He picked up his glass and moved away from the wall, back into the room, and the crowd adjusted around him the way water adjusts around something cold and dense dropped into it. She watched him go. Then she looked back at the painting. The rigging was still wrong. She found it oddly settling. She started on a Wednesday. The office Vane's people brought her to was not what she expected, which meant she had built an expectation without realizing it, which annoyed her. She'd imagined something theatrical, dark wood, safes behind paintings, the architectural grammar of menace. It was a floor in a building in the financial district, clean, efficient, the kind of space where a medium-sized logistics company might work, except that the network infrastructure was significantly more sophisticated than a medium-sized logistics company would need, and the man at the front desk looked at her with eyes that catalogued her in approximately 3 seconds and found her expected. They'd been told she was coming. A woman named Ressa showed her to a workroom, a real one, not a performative one, with 2 large monitors, a dedicated hardline, and stacks of physical ledgers bound in grey that she recognized as a specific kind of bookkeeping used for parallel accounting structures, the kind where you needed to track 2 sets of figures simultaneously without letting either set know the other existed. She sat down. She started reading. By Thursday afternoon, she had found 3 anomalies. Not errors. Errors had a shape. A mistake made and not caught, a figure transposed, a decimal drifted. These were something different. These were decisions. Someone had understood the architecture of the records well enough to move money in ways that created the appearance of legitimate flow, while actually siphoning to a secondary route. It was careful. It was not perfect. Nothing was perfect if you looked long enough at the right angles. The first time Vane came to the workroom, she was eating a sandwich she'd brought from a deli 2 blocks away. Turkey, no tomato. The specific order she'd been placing at that deli for 4 years. Because the deli was consistent, and consistency mattered when you spent your days surrounded by things that were not consistent. He stood in the doorway for a moment. She didn't look up. You're eating at the desk, he said. I'm working at the desk, she said. The eating is incidental. He came in, pulled a chair from the corner, not up beside her but across, where he could see her face and see the monitors without sitting adjacent. She noticed this. She noticed the deliberateness of it, the same way she noticed the deliberateness of everything he did. Cassian Vane was not a man who made accidental choices about where to place his body in a room. "Well," he said. She set down her sandwich. She turned one of the monitors toward him and walked him through what she'd found. She didn't simplify. She'd learned early that people who operated at Vane's level didn't want simplification. They wanted precision, delivered at whatever speed they could sustain. And if they couldn't sustain it, they told you. He didn't tell her. He followed every point without asking her to repeat herself. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. 3 sources, he said. 3, but they're coordinated. This isn't one person running 3 routes. This is one person who understands the system well enough to create 3 routes that look unrelated. Someone inside. Someone who's been inside long enough to understand the system the way you understand something you live with every day. She paused. Not a new hire, not a consultant. Someone who's been here. She calculated. Looked at the earliest anomaly, the first date, the subtle shift in the pattern. At least 4 years. He looked at her. She looked back. "Keep going," he said. She went back to her sandwich. He didn't leave. She worked, and he sat in the chair across from her with a stillness she had already come to recognize as his particular variety of attention, and she found, against any reasonable expectation, that it did not bother her. Most people's presence in a room while she worked was an intrusion, a noise. Vane's presence was more like barometric pressure, present, measurable, not demanding anything. "Do you always bring food from outside?" he said eventually. "Consistency," she said. "You don't trust the kitchen here. I don't trust kitchens I haven't evaluated. That's either very rational or very sad." "It's efficient," she said. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." He almost smiled again. She was beginning to catalogue his almost smiles the way she catalogued anomalies, noting them, logging them, not yet sure what pattern they formed. He left an hour later, didn't say goodbye, just stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. The room felt measurably different without him in it, which was information she chose to set aside and not examine. She went back to the ledgers. By the end of the following week, she had it, not the name, not yet. But the shape of the person, where they sat in the organizational structure, what access they needed to have, the window of time in which they were present on both sides of the accounting system simultaneously. She had reduced it to 11 people, then 7, then 4. She was sitting with the 4 names, looking at them on a piece of paper she'd written by hand, because the habit of handwriting made her think differently than typing, when Vane came in and stopped. He looked at the paper. 4, she said. He sat. She walked him through it, the reasoning, the methodology, the points of intersection that made each name viable. He listened the way he always listened, which was completely, without interruption, with the quality of attention she associated with people who were used to receiving information that had life or death weight and treating it accordingly. When she finished, she said, "I can get it to 1. I need access to 2 more datasets. The vendor payment schedule from Q3 2 years ago, and the internal audit log from the security system, cross-referencing physical presence with financial anomalies." He was looking at her. "I'll have them sent tonight," he said. She nodded, started to turn back to the monitors. "You haven't asked," he said. She turned back. "Asked what? What happens to the person?" She held his gaze. His face gave her nothing, which was consistent. "That's not my department," she said. "It doesn't concern you. It concerns me in the abstract, in the specific. I find the leak. What happens after the leak is found is an organizational decision. I'm a contractor. I wasn't hired to have opinions about enforcement. Most people who find a thing want to know what happens to it. Most people," she said, "haven't spent 3 years fixing problems for free and receiving fruit baskets." She turned back to the monitors. "I know the value of staying in my lane." The silence lasted long enough that she thought he'd left. Then he said, "You think I'm no different from Gerald." She looked at him over her shoulder. "I think you're considerably more dangerous than Gerald and considerably more honest about what you are, which is actually better." She held his gaze. "Gerald told me he valued my work. You told me what you'd give me in exchange for it. I know where I stand with you. I never knew where I stood with him. Something moved in his face then, slower than his almost smiles, deeper. He didn't say anything. He left. She got the datasets an hour later. It took her until 2 in the morning. She wrote the name on the paper, under the other 4, and then she crossed the other 4 out with a single line each, leaving 1. She left the paper on the desk where Vane would see it when he came in. She put on her coat, turned off the desk lamp, stood in the dark room for a moment, looking at the city through the window. The grid of it, the geometry, lights and grids and systems all running simultaneously in their parallel tracks, each invisible to the others unless you knew how to look. She was very tired. She was also, underneath the tired, something else. Something she didn't have an efficient word for. She'd done good work, real work. The kind that mattered, that had weight, that required the specific shape of her mind to do correctly. And someone had known that. Had looked across a ballroom and seen not her dress or her shoes or the thing her stepsister had made of her for entertainment, but the actual mechanism of her, what she could do, what she was worth. She picked up her bag. The door opened. Vane stood in the frame. He looked at the paper on the desk. He looked at her. He walked to the desk, picked up the paper, read the name. She watched his face. Nothing performed happened on it. No satisfaction, no anger, no theatrical gravity. Just a man receiving information he'd needed, processing it, closing a door. He set the paper back down. "The contract," she said. "Gerald's detoned. I want confirmation in writing." Tonight, he reached into his jacket. He produced a folded document, printed, signed, already bearing the date, and held it out to her. "Read it." She always read contracts, all of them. Every line. Vane's people were apparently aware of this, because the document was precise, unambiguous, and written in the kind of language that meant exactly what it said with no supplementary interpretations available. She folded it, put it in her bag. "Thank you," she said. He was looking at her. That quality of attention again. The weight of it, the specificity. "The 4 years of unpaid work," he said. "I'm aware of what Gerald cost you, not just the debt." She didn't say anything. "There's a position," he said, "permanent, not the same as this, not investigation, more like architecture, building systems that don't leak in the first place." He paused. "The compensation is different from what you're used to." "Different how?" He told her. She kept her face where it was. She was very practiced at this. She had learned at Simone's elbow that the worst thing you could give someone who was watching you was the reaction they'd predicted. "I'll consider it," she said. He almost smiled. More of an almost than usual. "You'll take it," he said, not arrogant, just stated, the same way he stated everything, as information, not performance. "I'll consider it," she said again. She moved toward the door. He didn't step aside immediately, not blocking her, not deliberately making her navigate around him, but simply present in the way that doors are present, requiring acknowledgement. She stopped. She looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the scar that ran along his jaw. An old one, faded to silver, the kind that stopped registering as a feature after a while and became just part of a face's specific geography. "Why me?" she said. "At the Gala, you'd never spoken to me before. You could have approached Gerald directly." He considered it for a moment, actually considered it, which meant he had not pre-prepared an answer, which she noted. "Because Gerald," he said, "sees his money as something that happens to him. You see it as something that has structure, architecture, logic." He looked at her directly. "I've worked with accountants for 20 years. They see numbers, you see the story the numbers are telling. That's not the same thing." She held that, turned it over, let it sit with the weight it actually had rather than the weight she wanted to assign it. "The painting," she said. "What?" "At the Gala." A pause. He almost smiled again, and this time it was closer to an actual smile than any of the previous ones, and she filed it away before she could stop herself. "I noticed," he said. She walked out. She took the elevator down alone, through the building's quiet interior, through the lobby where the night desk guard nodded at her without curiosity, and out into the street where the city was doing its constant low-grade work of existing. Cabs and delivery trucks, and the distant percussion of someone's music, 2 floors up in an apartment across the way. She stood on the sidewalk. The contract was in her bag. Her stepfather's debt was gone. Her stepsister's laugh was somewhere behind her in a room she'd already left, which was the only place it deserved to be. She started walking. She was already thinking about the architecture of the system he'd described, the way you would need to build it from the inside out, starting with the assumption that every surface record had a shadow, and the shadow was where the truth lived, and the truth needed someone who could see both simultaneously without flinching. She could see both simultaneously. She had always been able to. She'd just been doing it for free, for people who sent her fruit. The night air was cold and sharp and real. She kept walking, the city's grid unfolding in front of her, parallel, logical, full of hidden architecture, and she did not look back.